I should say, first of all, that Liza's book officially comes out on, I think, Tuesday or Monday or Tuesday, and so it is not here today. So please do go to the Bunch of Grapes and other stores and pick it up later this week. Before I ask Liza a series of questions, I wanted to start by actually inviting her to introduce you to the world of the book, which is a very specific one.
Yeah, so Villa America, which is my second novel. I'm not. Do I need this? You guys are right there, aren't you? Is biographical fiction, basically. So it's based on the lives of Sarah and Gerald Murphy, who were two American expatriates who found themselves at the center of this literary and artistic community in Paris and Antibes in the 1920s. And so they were great friends and muses to Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Pablo Picasso, John Dos Passos, Cole Porter, et cetera, and then sort of name-dropping list goes on. And they had this rather sort of charmed and then quite tragic life. And I sort of became aware of them when I first did my master's degree on tender... on the film. Sorry, fella. When I did my master's degree on Tender is the Night, and the book is dedicated to Sarah and Gerald Many-Fett. And I thought, who are these Sarah and Gerald people? And, I had sort of been aware of them a little bit through things like A Movable Feast, Hemingway's sort of biographical work, where he describes the rich as being these pilot fish. Or no, Dos Passos was the pilot fish that brought the rich to him, and who sort of, he suggests, sort of ruined his life through, I don't know, I guess being nice to him and giving him money, which, that's sort of Hemingway for you, but ungrateful. But, there's, and that's sort of, I had sort of vaguely aware of them, but never really clocked it. And when I started to do this research into them, I read Amanda Vale's amazing biography and sort of fell in love with these people. I mean, they're quite extraordinary. They had this, well, and I think it's difficult to articulate. They had this sort of X factor that goes on with them, where life in and of itself was a kind of performance art, but not self-consciously, not in a way that's sort of, that's too much, in a way that came very naturally and generously from them. And so that's sort of how I got started in writing the book and fell in love with them and then wanted to write about their lives.
Yeah, I think anybody who in a short span of time has become friends with Hemingway, Cole Porter, Dos Passos, the Fitzgeralds, it's gone beyond being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
They've got to have some kind of chemistry or magic.
Right. Yeah, they do. They have a magic,
that's drawing those people to them.
Yeah.
Or I guess generosity is always a factor too.
Yeah, and I think they did have this sort of ability to make people, from what I read and sort of what I understood, they made. I think it's a very special gift if you can make, in a big group of people, everyone feel like they're the most important person in the room.
Especially those with big egos.
Yes, big ego.
So in your afterword here, one of the things I'm going to quote you. You say, one of the major differences between historical fiction and biography is that in biography, gaps in the known narrative can be filled only with supposition, whereas in fiction, the gaps are where the story lives. So I'd love you to explain that.
Yeah, I think that, one of fiction's jobs as opposed to biography is to articulate the things that we may not articulate to anyone else in our lives, the sort of the secret things that go on in your heart and mind. And I think we spoke about this earlier, but Eudora Welty says that, fiction has to keep a private address. And there's this element to that where, in essence, what's left behind for biography is a public persona in a lot of ways. You may have intimate things in letters, but still to sort of write somebody famous something in a letter, that letter might be seen one day. There's a consciousness to it. And I think that what fiction does is it explores the things that haven't been articulated. And for me, for Villa America, one of the things that sort of became clear in my research is that Gerald Murphy struggled with his sexuality. And so what I wanted to explore was how that plays into a marriage and a family and a love life, and how somebody would deal with that. But that's not something that's written in letters or left behind. So that's the gap.
And the person that Liza's talking about in the book is a character named Owen, who is there's multiple characters, but these three essential players, Gerald and Sarah Murphy, the historical figures, and Owen, your invention, serve as kind of the posts of this triangle. But Can you talk about where Owen comes from? So the invention of Owen, where was your starting point for him?
Yeah, so he is a wholly fictional character, but I wanted to have some sort of continuity for biographical fiction. And I mean, I think just for myself, really, to make myself sort of feel better about inventing someone and inserting him in these people's lives. And one of the things I sort of came across was reading this Amanda Vale biography was she recounts a story where Sarah and Gerald Murphy host a caviar and champagne party for Hemingway in this casino in Juan-les-Pins, and they'd never had caviar on the Riviera in the summer before because it would have to come from the Baltic region by train and it would spoil in the heat. So she, so extravagantly decides to hire a pilot to fly it in. And this is a time there's no commercial airlines. It's not like an easy thing. Where is this pilot? Planes are made out of like paper and wood. Where is this guy coming from? And I thought, that's insane. Who is this pilot? Where did she find this fellow? And so I thought, maybe my guy is a pilot. Maybe this is him. And I sort of worked my way backwards. So I had to get him backward. So one of the things I discovered in the research was that a lot of a lot of Americans flew for France in World War I because America entered the war so late. So the boys who wanted to fight and wanted to fly planes flew under the French banner for most of the war. And, amazingly, fighter pilots had a life expectancy of several weeks in World War I, which is just, crazy times. So if you survived, you were generally got injured or something had happened to you to take you out of the game. And they had transformed all the casinos in the south of France and made them hospitals. So I thought, right, he could be this American who flew for France, who gets injured and ends up on the Riviera in a hospital, and that's how he would come in contact with the Murphys.
I love all that story, by the way, but from a personality standpoint, you take these two historical figures, Gerald and Sarah, and you have a pretty good sense of what their psychologies were like from the letters, from the other well-known figures who wrote about them, talked about them. But you're creating this invention, Owen, who's going to be central to their lives. To what degree was his personality an offshoot of sort of a counterpoint for you to the real knowable personalities of the Murphys?
Yeah, I mean, Owen comes from a different background in the novel. It's one thing I wanted. A lot of these people are quite wealthy. They're extremely articulate. They're artists, and I wanted somebody who wasn't as kind of talky, So I invented this person who's quite silent, in fact, which is sort of a funny thing for a novel. No one says anything for a long time. But I had sort of, I wanted... Because I felt sometimes like these people, if you're going to sort of invent, you're going to talk about Ernest Hemingway and Fitzgerald and all these people having a conversation, you can get very precious, and I thought that's going to be kind of irritating at a certain point. And I wanted to have somebody who had an outsider's perspective on it, somebody who wasn't from that same world. So it was, natural that I would create this character and have him be sort of an opposite in a way to those people. And I think, also he was probably the easiest one to create. I think the boundaries of biography can make creating a fictional character very difficult. I found the Murphys the hardest people to write, and Owen, who's my entire invention, the easiest.
Yeah, I want to ask you to dwell on that for a second, because there's certainly always going to be a challenge in writing a historical figure, because they come with so much. We know information about those historical figures. We have opinions about those historical figures, and they have personalities which have become mythological to some degree, which may not be an accurate depiction of who those people were at all.
Yeah.
So you inherit that when you're trying to put them in your book.
Yeah.
And you said to me that that part of your approach to grappling with that was to find some kind of humanizing element or fact from their life, which could help you, I guess, break down sort of this mythological figure around them. Yeah, so you can give me an example.
What we were talking about was Ernest Hemingway, whose image comes with so much baggage. And I think everyone thinks that they know who that person is and what he was like, and et cetera, et cetera. And he, is sort of hyper masculine and this kind of hunting and shooting and fishing and lovemaking sort of fellow. And I, and what I discovered, he used to be sort of a hero of mine when I was younger, and I sort of came to hate him. And as the more I researched him, he's quite a bigot, even for that time period, and a misogynist, and quite a really unpleasant person. And but at the same time, you don't want to write him as a villain. It seems it's not human. Nobody's all good or all bad. But I also didn't want to write him as a titan of literature, because that's not very interesting in a novel in a way. So I found one of the things that really moved me about him and made me come back around to sort of feeling okay about him was the book opens. This isn't sort of, I'm not giving anything away, but one of the Murphys. Well, anyway, when their young son is very ill, deathly ill, Ernest Hemingway wrote letters to him. And the letters are very sweet and very moving. And he, went out and he'd shot this impala in Africa, as one does when you're Ernest Hemingway. And he had it mounted and sent to this child because he said, when you lie in bed, you can look at this on the wall and it'll be beautiful and it's clean and lovely. And I just thought, it's very much within his personality, but it's also very moving. That, they had a part of him that could relate to a child. And when you see that in a human being, you can't help but sort of be moved,
And Owen, the quiet character, the third character, comes from an island, an unnamed island. But I gather from you, this is the unnamed island in a way, in the back of your imagination.
Yeah.
You grew up coming here, in Eggertown.
Yes.
But so I guess first of all, why did you have this quiet character come from an island? To what degree does this island make a difference than another one in your invention of him?
So one of the things is that Owen sort of becomes the victim of a sort of scandal. Or creates a scandal. And so I thought, when you need to run away from someplace, from a scandal, if you live, on the mainland, like you just go to the next town. It doesn't, it's not a big deal. But to have an exodus, which is what I needed to get him out of his life, to get him into a plane, to get him to France, I thought an island was the perfect place because if something happens on an island, you have to leave the island. You can't just go to the next town over. You got to get out of there. So it was a way of sort of binding him as, a place that at once is your home, but it's also the place that you have to leave. And I think islands are perfect for that. Also, islands breed eccentric people. And I'm all for that, And so they make the most interesting characters.
Let's stay on place for a second. So, because since the very important part of the book takes place on the Riviera, and an important aspect of the Murphys' lives were there, where they were interacting with these famous figures. What is it about the Riviera that seems to loom so large in American culture? I mean, it seems to have been a fascination with Americans for 100 years.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's a glamorous destination, et cetera. But at the beginning of the century, it wasn't as glamorous as it became.
And I mean, the Murphys were sort of, what the sort of lore of the Murphys is that they invented summer on the Riviera. Because before the season, you wouldn't sunbathe. It was too hot. Nobody went swimming. It wasn't this kind of thing. So what they would do is go to England for the season, where you had the horse races and you had, Ascot, you had all these things. And then when that was finished, you went to the north of France, where it was cool. Because the idea of being hot was just not on, And the Murphys loved to sunbathe and sort of, ended up, so the Hotel du Cap, which is a very fancy hotel in Cap d'Antibes, they convinced the owner to keep it open for the summer. And it was them and a Chinese diplomat. And they had the run of the place, and they had a sort of skeleton crew working there. And that sort of started a lot of, they aren't the first people who went there, but they definitely set a tone for that era, and I think they're the ones who lured all these people down there in a way and made it quite popular. And I think there was a certain point in some of the letters that I read in the 30s, they're saying, it's overrun now, and so it probably sounds familiar about the island, doesn't it? It's overrun now. You can no one we know is here. They're all outsiders, and we try to have the children throw seaweed at them on the beach, so they'll be, so they'll go away and they won't come swim with us, and etc. Yeah.
Now, you spent time on the Mediterranean or in Riviera, but I think when I asked you about it, you specifically did not go back as a part. It was some time ago that you were there. You did not go back as a part of crafting the book. Why is that? Why would you not, in a way, choose not to go back while you were preparing the book?
Yeah, I lived in France for 10 years, and I worked as a journalist, and I did the Cannes Film Festival, and I sort of had seen all that part of the Riviera, and had spent time down there. And when I was writing the book, I had the option. Obviously, I could have gone and sort of done some research and gone back and looked and stayed in the hotel and sort of had a look around. But I felt like, and I feel that especially when I write about Martha's Vineyard as well, which I have in both books. I feel like memory is the most intense place to write from. Everything's brighter in your memory than it is in real life. Everything smells more. Everything's, it's a more intense experience to write from memory than from vision. I mean, I found that.
Right. So
Yeah.
the limitation is a strength in that sense.
I do.
Or
I think
limiting yourself to the
Yeah, I
axis.
think so, and I think it also frees you up because there's an element where if you go, then you're like, oh yeah, it isn't really like that. I thought it was like that, but it's not really like that. Oh, so now I can't do that, because you feel sort of some inauthentic on some level. But if you write from memory, then you're not bound by you're only bound by your memory, not by what's a reality.
Your first novel, Tigers in Red Weather, was a big success, and I think there's an international bestseller, won awards, etc. Readers who enjoy a book inevitably sort of have a craving for the author to do more of the same. Write down, give me a sequel even, or do another version of what you did. But obviously, most authors have the reverse impulse, which is they want to explore something new. So can you talk about this book in relationship to Tigers in Red Weather? What aspects of this book?
I mean, I think they're both
were a new challenge for you.
I think they're both. Oh yeah, well, I think they're both.
How are they the same too?
They're both portraits of a marriage, and I obviously have some kind of obsession with that. But this one is really like this is a love story, and the first one was more of a sort of noir book. And so it had more of a sort of like, the characters were a bit crueler. They had a little more teeth and claw than these people have. These people have just sort of, it's a love story and it's a tragedy. So it has a very different arc to it than the last one, which ends up, and this one ends, in essence, sort of down. It's a bummer. But I also think, though, sort of listening to that question, I feel like I wonder, I might be writing the same books for the rest of my life. I think some authors just write it over and over and over again and sort of dress it up in different ways. And Ishiguro just recently said, I've written the same book 10 times. No one's noticed, And I thought, yeah, I hear you, and I think that for me, one of the things I've realized that I'm obsessed with as well is Martha's Vineyard. And I somehow just cannot write a book without putting it in there.
In some small respect.
Yeah, I think it's a childhood thing. I think, again, it comes back to memory, I think, I think there's like a kind of, in a way, this has become home to me because it's the last place that is actually, is the same. My house is the same house that I remembered from when I was very little, and everything else has changed, so...
Yeah, except that you have to throw seaweed at the people on the beach now.
Listen, I live in Edgartown. More than seaweed is required,
right.
My friend. Yeah.
In this era, the book is covers a reasonable, largely span of time, 40 years, I think.
Yeah.
But obviously, the 20s and the 30s are central to the book, and these figures that come through are, in a way, the great modernists of various kinds:
Yes.
Fitzgerald, Passos,
Yes.
Hemingway, Picasso. But you've mentioned to me that one of the things you did as in preparation for writing the book was actually read Henry James. It wasn't read the modernist. You went kind of backwards. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? What is it about James? Why did you go to James?
Well, James was like probably at that point the popular novelist of the day. I mean, he was really well regarded. Everyone would have known.
It's who they would have read.
It's who they would have read. Everyone would have known him, and they would have influenced any of those writers as well. It would have had either reacting against it or stealing from it. And so the other thing is that in a way, and I think that it had such a profound effect on me reading all these James novels before and during writing this book, because I think that in the end I sort of wrote quite a Jamesian novel in a way, which is a kind of it has a slow burn. It is like a beginning where we know the background and everyone's sort of wandering around a little bit before we get to the central action, and I think that, what's amazing to me is, yes, the modernist, when you read Hemingway, you don't see much of James, but you read Fitzgerald, you can see quite a bit of James in there. I mean, it's in the prose itself, I think, rather than maybe the stories. But, yeah, and I think they're classic novels, it's the real, we were talking about the, not a page turner,
Well, and we were discussing a few days ago, the pace of James is slower, but it's an invitation to be slower on purpose.
Yes.
And there can be great
enjoy
satisfaction in reading something which is at a very different pace.
Without having to feel like you're trying to find something out all the time. It's like somewhere hidden in this book is the answer to this question that we started with, And it's not like that in James. It really is like, what are these people talking about? What are they thinking about? Like, and you're sort of fascinated by everything they're doing, Just their everyday life becomes sort of fascinating. And I wanted to try to emulate that,
On a sort of I think people will be surprised to hear that spaghetti westerns played a very small role as an influence in the book. But
Yes.
because how did that happen?
Well, okay, so if you guys have seen these spaghetti westerns, like Once Upon a Time in the West and all that sort of stuff, that the hero of these stories is always silent. I mean, they say basically nothing, and they do nothing unless provoked. They just kind of put on their poncho and ride away. And I'm kind of obsessed with that idea of masculinity, this sort of silence, this like wall of silence. And I wanted to write a character, a masculine character that was like that. And so Owen is pretty much straight out of a spaghetti western, in that way. He's very much the like just the smooth surface. You have no idea what's, the hidden depths underneath. And that's, I think, actually one of the reactions to one of the characters says that.
This is how authors work. This is the way we steal things from other places that you wouldn't think.
Yeah.
One aspect of the book is that correspondence plays a very central role in not so much the plot, but the way the story is told.
Mm-hmm.
There are letters from various characters and historical figures and from various periods on various topics. Can you talk a little bit about that decision to use letters as a narrative tool? How did you find that, and how do the letters represent a mosaic of the factual and the invented? I mean, what's the role they play?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of there's letters sort of scattered throughout, but the great majority of them come later in the book. And that was in a way to kind of telescope time. It's a very good way of compressing time so that people can tell you, the reader, what's going on while they tell each other what's going on, and you don't actually have to act it out. And because it covers 40 years, at a certain point you do need to compress some things. And the letter sort of acted in that way because I think, it's about 6 years or so those letters cover. And it's a handy way of doing it. On the other hand, there's also because these people wrote amazing letters. They really did. And so when I was doing the research, you fall in love with these letters. And if I'd had my way, I would have just taken their letters and put them in there, And there is, in fact, there's 2 letters in the book that are real, that were written by the people who they're attributed to. And the rest of them was about also, trying to, and also sort of an interesting exercise as a writer, trying to kind of parrot another writer's style, without actually plagiarizing them.
And you stole sentences here and there, didn't you, from the historical letters?
I mean, it's
stole's the wrong word.
A few words, but yeah. Excuse me. I think the legal department would have a problem with that. No, I think yes, but there are. I mean, if you're writing a letter from Hemingway, the minute you start saying something's clean and light, like you've basically stolen from him, haven't you? So yes, there's definitely a few things like in some of the invented letters there'll be a phrase or something that's straight out of somebody's like lexicon or straight out of their writing style or yeah.
The Murphys were the couple who were famously attributed with the expression "living well is the best revenge," which they may or may not have said, I gather. But why? Tell me about that phrase, and does it apply to them, or what ways does it apply to them?
Well, I think that I have suspect that that phrase is probably attributed because Hemingway did such a hatchet job on them in The Movable Feast, and really, it was very unkind. And I think that has more to do with living well is the best revenge. Although Sarah Murphy, because this came from Calvin Tompkins, who was their neighbor, and then did an article on them in the New Yorker, and then that was expanded into sort of a small biography, a kind of beautiful sort of slender biography, and he. The name of the biography is Living Well is the Best Revenge. But when it came out, Sarah Murphy did say, we never said that. Who are we revenging ourselves upon, And I think a lot of things were attributed to them that they just didn't own at all, But I think that phrase comes from there. But they did have to survive some really horrible things, And I think that it's a survival story as well, It's about enduring after the fact, after the charmed days are over, after the golden age has passed, when you're left with your heartbreak and you endure, and you live on and you don't just die. The story doesn't just stop, And I think that may be something to do with it as well.
As a final question before we give people a chance to ask any questions, can we talk a little bit more about the Murphys? You mentioned as you in your afterword that as you studied them, as you read their works, that you became captivated by their very individual, sort of unique voices, or what was that? How do you characterize the way that they lived or communicated that seemed to you striking and unusual?
I mean, listen, I had to write like 500 pages to articulate that,
true.
you
Okay,
know,
right.
and it's really difficult. I think this is, you know, a lot of, there's a sort of, one of John Dos Passos wrote a letter to, I think, Archie McLeish, saying, you know, we've all tried to capture them in our work and we've all sort of failed. Like none of us could quite encapsulate what makes them so special. And I think that's true. It's like you write around it, don't you? And I think for me, I guess, I don't know, they seemed like a lot of those people had a lot of snark in them, you know? They were entertaining and charming and interesting and articulate, but they weren't necessarily the nicest people. And I think these people managed to do all of that and be quite generous and kind, and they loved each other and they loved their children. And there's this sort of element that's just sort of golden about them, you know? And I thought, what a wonderful thing to have lived that life, to have given that everybody loves you because you're so generous and so lovely, you know? I mean, and that's sort of rarely written about too. It's hard to write nice people,
well, that's right.
isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's right.
Without making them come off horrible and sort of smug and self-satisfied. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Amor.
Now, do we have any questions from the floor, as it were? Please, yes.
Yes. Yes, he is painting because he painted all sort of up till 1929 when his.
The question is about Gerald Murphy's as a painter. Gerald Murphy, for those who don't know, is kind of known as one of the first American surrealist painters. Did a series of very important canvases that are in major museums. Like there's one in the Yale Art Museum, I think in the Met, but only a handful survived.
Yeah, so he only made 10 canvases, and I think 4 of them survived. There's one at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, one at the Guggenheim. No, not the Guggenheim. Anyway, one of the other guys, the Whitney, and a couple I think in the Dallas Museum, which were donated by Archie McLeish, the poet, and they were his that Gerald had given him. And Gerald, when his son became ill, stopped painting, which is kind of very symbolic, and never took it up again, and didn't take care of any of his works, didn't care what happened to them, had just sort of like turned his back on it. And yes, I did include that that he's a painter and that it gives him this pleasure, and that then it ends sort of sad. Yeah. Yes.
How did you deal with Tender as the Night writing the novel? And secondly, with Owen, did you think about the fact that Bruce Lover was the driver?
Yeah, right? Oh, sorry. Yes, he said, how did I sort of deal with Tender as the Night when I was writing the book? And that did I think about the fact that Bruce Lover was the driver? Tender as the Night, yes. I love that book. But you know what? I really didn't think that much about it when I was writing this one, and probably on purpose. It was probably self-preservation. But that book's a very different book. That book, Tender as the Night, although Fitzgerald suggested it was written about Sarah and Gerald, it really is about Fitzgerald and Zelda. I mean, it's very clear that those characters are much more them than they ever were the Murphys. But it is set in the Murphys' life. It's as if you picked them up and put them down in the Murphys' lifestyle. And I think that's Scott's also envy to a certain degree, I mean, I think he really wanted their life. But anyway, so that, that sort of, I sort of pushed it away. And there's no comparison. It's an amazing book, and it's a just genius book, and it's beautiful and brilliant, and it is not the same kind of story, although a tragedy nonetheless. And then the Bruce Lover, yes, I mean, what a great detail, right? Well, so I had been reading, there's a detail in the novel where Bruce Lover, this person dies in the same way that Bruce was in love with his driver. And his driver had a girlfriend, and Bruce moved the driver and the girlfriend into his house. And Bruce just really just dug this dude on such a level. And the guy stole money from Bruce and ran away. And Bruce didn't care. He wanted him back. He was desperate to have him back. So he, bribed his family, bribed all these people, bought him a car, offered him anything he wanted. And the guy wouldn't come. He decided he wanted to become a pilot. So in the place where Owen, my character, has his pilots, he creates a kind of flying business, was actually Bruce, the airfield where Bruce Lover went up in a plane, and his plane crashed on his first flight into the bay there, and he died. And they found notes on him when they finally got his body out that were Bruce money. Just sort of amazing story. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, go ahead. Oh, one more. Time for one more question? Time for one more question.
Is Villa America still
Right.
standing?
No, I love it. Fight for the questions. Villa America is not. It was torn down. The land is there, obviously, but it's owned by a Russian, apparently, with a very scary dog and a big fence. So, yeah.
Not the same as the Murphys.
Not
In
the
person.
same. Not the same.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
you for
you.
joining us.
Thank you.